Greetings Wanderers, and welcome back to Yindy's Tips and Tricks. With episode 13 of Halfwits finally out, it's time to get back to some practical advice to make sure that your TTRPG adventures remain as epic as possible. So, in the last video, I covered 5 tips for new dungeon masters. Arguably one of my best videos yet, which YouTube did not promote. Thanks YouTube! So make sure you go check that out. Not now, later. Also, check out my love letter to the Amiga 500 and a tribute to my dad over on my gaming channel at Yindy Plays. So for this video, I want to recommend starting off with and embracing pre-written adventures. The too long didn't watch. When I first started out, I tried to homebrew everything, mainly to show off my writing chops. But if you're playing D&D as an adult with responsibilities and playing TTRPGs are your way of relaxing and hanging out with friends, then homebrewing an entire adventure with delicately woven plot hooks and deeply personalised storylines for all your PCs may just not be viable. Add in the stress of possibly having to learn an entirely different system and then teaching it to your players, then suddenly the prep time required for this quirky little game starts to feel like a second job. But fear not, that's where pre-written adventures come in. Now, there are literally thousands of D&D and TTRPG related products out there, some arguably better than others, including many system agnostic adventures designed to be run with any game. Though to be fair, you can convert any adventure into any game system. Although we'll maybe leave converting for another video. For this video, I want to specifically focus on pre-written adventures produced by the developers who created the systems. Mainly looking at the starter boxes as they're literally sold as beginner-friendly starting points. I'll give some examples of where this is done well, as well as a few examples of where the developer dropped the ball somewhat. Doctor Who, Keys of Scaravore. Developer-produced pre-written adventures can come in a variety of forms, from the titular starter box, through to an anthology collection of individual one-shots that can be run separately or strung together as part of an overarching narrative. Or, perhaps, a fully realised campaign module designed to take your players through from character creation right the way to the higher levels of that system. But let's start with starter boxes. Many systems and product lines published a dedicated starter box as an onboarding point for new players. However, if you're like me, I'd like to fully commit and bulk buy an entire product range for a system. Shut up, I don't have a problem, you have a problem. Then you might be tempted to skip over the starter box entirely, thinking that it's a bit redundant and its contents are probably covered elsewhere. That used to be me. I'd often jump straight to the core rulebook, source books and supplemental materials. And while I do love physically owning and displaying the books on my shelves, starter boxes often come with tokens, maps, pre-generated character sheets, which all felt like a bit of a waste really, seeing as I don't nearly get to play and host games in person as much as I would like, opting more for virtual tabletops or VTTs. Also, starter boxes tend to come with a streamlined version of the core rulebook, something that if I liked the system, I was going to buy anyway. And this led me to viewing starter boxes as like the Fisher-Price version of the real game. But after running a few starter sets, I finally came round on the idea. Because you see, a good pre-written adventure should act as a sort of tutorial, introducing new systems and mechanics, and then allowing both the player and the GM to apply those mechanics in context before then gradually upping the complexity. So let's have a look at a few examples. Dungeons & Dragons The Lost Mine of Phandelver starter set and a Stranger Things starter set. Surprisingly, one of the most anemic starter boxes is for Dungeons & Dragons itself. For a £20 price point, you get, well, not a lot. There's a streamlined version of the rules, which were already free under the OGL. Some pre-gen character sheets, which, let's face it, your players won't use because they want to make their own. A set of perfectly functional but uninspiring dice. And the Lost Mine of Phandelver adventure. A well-designed and beloved campaign for levels 1 to 5. There's nothing wrong with the Lost Mine of Phandelver. My issue is that the starter set doesn't offer much that you can't get for free elsewhere. Even the dice, you can get by perfectly well using a dice roller app. And if you specifically want to run Phandelver, there is an objectively superior version that exists. The Lost Mine of Phandelver Shattered Obelisk, which expands the original adventure into a Baldur's Gate style full campaign, taking your characters from level 1 to 13. And it's only 10 quid more at £30 in the UK. Now, I never owned the original Phandelver starter set. Although, to be fair, it was the first starter set released for 5e back in 2014. I did, however, pick up the Stranger Things starter set, which suffers from many of the same issues. Aside from a couple of Stranger Things branded Demigorgon miniatures, not to be confused with the D&D Demigorgon, that's something else entirely, the adventure itself was fine, but pretty bare bones. And crucially, when compared to some of the other starter box offerings, it feels underwhelming. The Pathfinder 2 Beginner Box. At double the price, £40 in the UK, the Pathfinder 2 Beginner Box has some big shoes to fill, and boy does it deliver. Now, I don't own the physical box myself, but you can still find it on Amazon, and let me tell you, it's a chonky boy. They absolutely earn that £40 price tag. A quick note on Pathfinder in general. It's definitely an intermediate difficulty game to get into, and generally has a reputation for being a more rules-heavy, number-crunchy version of D&D. And in the fact that all the legacy and remastered rules from every published source is available for free over Archives of Nessus, and Pathfinder 2 could very quickly feel intimidating to break into. Thankfully, the starting adventure Menace Under Otari that's included in the box is the perfect introduction. The box contains all the staples you'd expect from a starter set, but it's a meatier version and includes a solid beginner-friendly rulebook with in-depth character options without being overwhelming, pre-gen character sheets, dice, the aforementioned Menace in Otari adventure, but also a wide array of sturdy character and monster tokens, high-quality maps, and quick reference cards for rules. If you're playing physically around the table, you've got everything you need for a very visual, tactile experience. And the adventure itself, Menace Under Otari, is a masterclass in how to structure an introductory adventure. It takes place in the small fishing town of Otari, close to, but far enough from, the big city of Absalom. Think Baldur's Gate or Neverwinter in D&D terms. This makes it totally plausible for characters of any race or background to be passing through. The town is surprisingly fleshed out too, with NPCs, shops, points of interest that make it feel like a real lived-in place. It also serves as a home base for the players to venture out from and return to. Players soon find themselves clearing out rats in the basement of the local tavern, a bit of a meme at this point, sure, but it does a great job at introducing the basics of combat. The party then descends into the first tutorial dungeon. This is where the game design really starts to shine. In the first room, they need to scale down a steep cliff into the darkness below. This introduces athletics and acrobatics checks, low light and dark vision mechanics, and the rules for torches and light sources, if someone in the party happens to not have dark vision.
Hooray! That should go well with my already racially pure ability to see in the dark.
Fun fact though, when I played through Menace Under Otari, literally everyone in the party had dark vision, except the rogue. That was awkward. The next encounter features a large cavern, full of sticky webs and a giant spider. This introduces stealth mechanics and rough terrain. The adventure continues in this vein, introducing new mechanics, explaining to the GM why it matters, and giving them and the players a chance to test it in a meaningful encounter. There are even branching paths and alternative routes for players who like to think outside the box. It's a bit like the intro sequence to Skyrim or Oblivion, where you sneak out of the Imperial dungeon just before the world opens up. Once players have finished the Menace in Otari and mastered the basics of Pathfinder 2e, they're then free to strike out into even grander adventures. Or dive directly into the Abomination Vault's mega dungeon, which ties directly into the beginner box. Some secret passages from Otari's dungeons even lead directly into the vaults, making the world feel familiar and connected. Seriously, if you're thinking about trying Pathfinder, start here. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Starter Set. One of the most insanely well supported systems I own, and one that takes up more than an entire shelf, is Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th Edition, WHFRP. At the time of writing, there are more than 30 official rulebooks, sourcebooks, and full campaigns, including the legendary Enemy Within, one of the most highly regarded TTRPG campaigns ever written. And there are even more books announced. Seriously, anyone who says that Warhammer Fantasy is dead, I will beat you over the head with my collection. Also, my message to Cubicle 7, you can stop now. My bookcase is about ready to crash through the floor. Maybe give some love to some of your other systems, like Wrath and Glory or Soulbound. And do we really need another Warhammer Old World RPG? Anyway, like Pathfinder, Warhammer Fantasy has a reputation for being dense, rules heavy and brutal. Think less heroic fantasy like D&D and more gritty survival like Game of Thrones. You play the medieval butcher, baker or candlestick maker. I might need a leg amputated after falling into the sewer chasing a giant rat man. Or maybe you just die of gout. You might think that being locked into one region of the Warhammer Old World setting rather limiting, but in reality it's one of the most deeply developed, dense and richly developed game worlds out there. The town of Ubersreik serves functionally as Otari did in Pathfinder, a player hub on the fringes of the Empire, caught in political turmoil and bordering the mountains full of dwarves and greenskins. It's no wonder that so many of the official adventures, including the starter set, are based here. It acts as a microcosm of the wider world. The starter box itself is like Pathfinder, and is packed to the brim with goodies, including the core rules, dice, examples of character sheets, maps, tokens, and of course a starting adventure. I actually haven't run the starter box yet. My players started off with Rough Days and Hard Nights, which contains some of my absolute favourite adventures. I'll likely do a separate video explaining exactly why I love it so much, but for now, let's just say it does an absolutely stellar job at onboarding both the player and the GM, while keeping the scope and scale of the game world manageable. I mean, it literally locks you in a tavern for your first game session during a murder mystery, and then slowly introduces you to the wider, densely packed world of Warhammer Fantasy. But the real gem in the box is the Guide to Ubersreik sourcebook. My one big criticism of Warhammer's published material is that while many of the smaller adventures can be run as standalone or dropped into larger campaigns, the political situation in Ubersreik especially, the story involving the Jumfroid family being disposed, is a central plot thread. And trying to get a straight answer to, so what's the deal with the Jumfroids, is a pain in the arse. That crucial info is annoyingly spread out over multiple sourcebooks. Honestly, I felt like Gandalf at the beginning of Fellowship, poring over dusty scrolls trying to figure out what the hell was going on. But if you're looking for a well-supported, dense, grimdark alternative to the shiny high fantasy of D&D, then definitely check out Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. We played it for over a year, and even though our first session took place entirely in the locked tavern, my players ended up governing Ubersreik by the end. And despite my intention to move on to the main plot of the Enemy Within campaign, we didn't even finish all the Ubersreik content, let alone explore the rest of the old world. Bit like my first playthrough of Morrowind, to be fair. Now, I've already done a first impressions of the Alien RPG starter set. If you want, go check that out. As for the starter box itself, it's a great self-contained adventure that really showcases the strengths of the system and its cinematic style. You get themed colour-coded dice that tie directly into the game mechanics, tokens, pre-built characters, and agenda/story cards that all link in neatly to the included scenario Chariot of the Gods. It's an excellent place to start to learn the system, and even sets up the next cinematic scenario, Destroyer of Worlds. So well worth checking out if you can. However, literally the day that I published my Aliens First Impression video, Free League announced that they were ending support for Alien First Edition and launching the Kickstarter for Alien 2E. Thanks, Free League. Avatar: The Last Airbender starter set. Now, I haven't played this one yet, but I'm very keen to. It comes with all the usual gubbins that you've come to expect, such as rules, maps, character sheets for 2 different eras, as well as dice, reference cards, and even quick start rules designed to get you into the game as quickly as possible. Also, if you buy the physical box, you get a download code for the digital version. I like that. I'll probably do a full video once I've had a chance to play it. Now, let's look at a bad pre-written adventure. Doctor Who: Keys of Scaravore. No, I will not stop beating this dead horse. To be fair, Doctor Who has its own dedicated RPG system, currently in its 2nd edition, which also has its own starter box, which I haven't played. I really like Cubicle 7. I love their work on the Warhammer RPGs, but if you're going to advertise Keys of Scaravore and Secrets of Scaravore as a collection of 4 new adventures, then maybe, just maybe, don't give them different names for different systems when they're the same 4 adventures. This just feels like a cheap way to confuse customers or their elderly relatives into accidentally buying the same campaign twice. And trust me, if you've endured it once, that's one too many times. Even for a Time Lord. Now, I think it's really important when criticising a game to critique the system and the product and not attack the people behind it. So let me be clear that my heavy criticism of Keys of Scaravore is meant to be constructive and a case study on how not to design your campaign product. I was gifted the Doctor Who Doctors and Daleks Collector's Edition for my birthday, and I was genuinely really excited to play it. It was billed to me as the halfway point, taking the unique mechanics of the Doctor Who RPG and presenting them within the familiar structure of good old D&D 5e. But what we got instead was the bastard red-headed stepchild under the stairs. The collection includes 3 books. The Player's Guide, which actually has some cool mechanics and ideas. The Alien Archives, which is basically just a lazy reskin of the Monster Manual, the less said the better. And the now infamous Keys of Scaravore campaign. In theory, cool. 1 book of new rules, 1 book of themed monsters, and a campaign to show them all off in. What could possibly go wrong? So what's wrong with it? The Keys of Scaravore is structured as 4 standalone adventures that could be run individually or strung together with the big bad Scaravore himself hinted at across the sessions. The Player's Guide introduces some genuinely interesting systems, like emotional and logical damage types. Yeah, I scored a crit! 3d12 emotional damage. Yeah, we've all been there. This is a cool idea, and it adds depth and variety beyond just clickety-clackety, I roll to attackety. It also carries over a core system from the Doctor Who RPG. Violence is always a last resort. Whoever escalates the violence first gets permanent disadvantage on all rolls for the rest of the scene. Again, in theory, great. It encourages negotiation and non-violent play. But the campaign and the alien archives are just lazy ports of regular D&D monsters. They didn't make use of any of the emotional and logical damage types. Hell, they didn't even bother to find and replace hit points with plot points, which is what they were renamed to in the player guide. Also, do you want to see Scaravore's stat block? It's that. This leaves the DM with no tools to support the systems that the developers introduced for the players. Now, obviously, for a wise and benevolent GM such as myself, I could patch and tweak things to work. But for a new GM just picking this up, they're going to struggle. I can't speak for how this works in the actual Doctor Who RPG system, but for me and my group, the only decent adventure out of the 4 was the second one, It's a Kind of Magic, where the players land on an alien world and psychic interference disables all their tech, replacing it with psychic powers, which are basically just reskinned cantrips. Sounds fun on paper, but when the best part of your Doctor Who campaign is when you literally turn off all the unique mechanics and you're left basically playing just reskinned D&D, then that's not really a ringing endorsement, is it? I mean, if we wanted to play regular D&D, we would play regular D&D. So yeah, while the player's guide does have some genuinely cool ideas in it, you're probably better off ditching Keys of Scaravore entirely and picking up another anthology collection like Journey Through the Radiant Citadel or The Infinite Staircase. Then just stick a sci-fi coat of paint over the top of it and call it a day. You'd probably have a better time. Well, that's enough ranting for now. Hopefully that gives you a better insight into what I look for in a good pre-written or introductory adventure. But enough about me. What's your favourite pre-written or starter box experience? Comment below and I might check it out for a future video. If you found this useful, please remember to like and subscribe. The next full episode to drop on this channel will be Halfwit's episode 14, and I'll be ready when it's ready. However, it will premiere 1 week early over on the Patreon, so please consider checking it out and supporting us. Even for the price of a cup of coffee, it helps us get closer to a season 2. I also stream weekly, and I've started putting out videos over on my gaming channel at Yindy Plays, where me and my co-hosts Tavares and Mad Mike are currently playing through Baldur's Gate 3, so come hang out. Thanks again for watching. Yindy out.